Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Distance Learning Program. It's great to be here with you today. I want to thank you for watching. I hope you and your families are all doing well and staying healthy. What we're going to do today is we're going to look in our green book. That's the Ventures3 book, this one. And we're going to turn to page 124. And today's lesson is about if clauses, or the future real conditional. We call it the future real conditional. Now, the first thing I would like to ask you about is what your plans might be for later on today. Now, maybe you might be thinking that you'd like to go for a walk. Now, let's think about the weather. The weather could be nice and sunny, or it could be raining later on today. So what we're going to do is talk about what would happen if the weather is nice. So you could say to yourself, well, let me think about that. If the weather's nice, okay, so that means I can go for my walk. So the way to make a sentence about this and to tell someone that this is your plan is you would say, if the weather is nice, I will go for a walk. And that's called the future real conditional. Now, the if clause is a condition. It tells if the weather is nice. That means it could be bad or it could be good. But I'm saying that in the case that it's a good situation where the weather is nice and it's not raining, then I will go for a walk. So the verb tense for the if clause is the present tense. You don't put it in the future, you put it in the present tense. So you say, if the weather is nice, I will go for a walk. So the main clause is the future tense. I will go for a walk. Now, what I'd like to do is look on page 124. The grammar focus says future real conditionals. This tells you exactly what I've just explained, but it's in writing here on page 124, so you can go back and read it and make sure that you understand it if you didn't understand my explanation. So it says, use an if clause to talk about future possibility. We're talking about what might happen in the future. It says use the simple present in the if clause. So the simple present is the first form of the verb that we learn. It says use the future in the main clause to talk about what could happen. So remember, I said if the weather is nice, that's the condition, I will go for a walk. That's what will happen if the condition is met. Now, let's take a look at the examples in this section. It says, if the fare is cheap enough, we will fly. If the fare is cheap enough, we will fly. So notice the if clause comes first in the sentence, and it's followed by a comma. And the verb that's used in the if clause is the verb to be, which is in the present tense, is. Then the main clause is at the end of the sentence. It says, we will fly. And that's in the future. So that's what's going to happen if the condition is met. Next, it says, we will fly if the fare is cheap enough. Now, this time, the if clause comes at the end of the sentence, and there is no comma in the sentence. So when the if clause comes at the end of the sentence, there's no comma. If it comes at the beginning of the sentence, you put a comma after the if clause. Next, it says, if the weather is bad, she won't go swimming. The if clause comes at the beginning, and it's in the present tense, and she won't go swimming means she will not go swimming. Won't is a contraction for will not. And that's the future tense. So remember, the if clause is in the present tense and the main clause is in the future tense. Next, she won't go swimming if the weather is bad. If they get time off from work, they will visit their relatives in California. And finally, they will visit their relatives in California if they get time off from work. So the last two examples show that it doesn't matter where you put the if clause. It can come at the beginning of the sentence or at the end of the sentence. Now let's go to section 2, practice. It says complete the sentences, use the simple present or future form of the verbs. Circle the future conditional clause. So I'm going to read each of these examples and I'm going to fill in the correct verb, and I will tell you which part of the sentence is the future conditional clause. Remember, the future conditional clause is the if clause. So, the first example says, Annette and William will take their children to Sea Adventure next month if William gets a few days off. And the future conditional clause is if William gets a few days off. Number 2, if they get a discount, they will reserve a room at a hotel. And the part that you circle is if they get a discount. That's the future conditional clause. Number 3, if prices are too high, they will not take an expensive vacation. And the future conditional clause is if prices are too high. We will have a picnic on Saturday if it does not rain. And the part of the sentence that you circle is if it does not rain. Number 5, if you give me the money, I will buy the concert tickets. And the future conditional clause is if you give me the money. Number 6, if you come to Chicago, we will meet you at the airport. And the future conditional clause is if you come to Chicago. Number 7, they will fly to Miami next month if they find a cheap flight. And the future conditional clause is if they find a cheap flight. Number 8, if it rains, we will have the party inside. And the clause that you want to circle is if it rains. And finally, number 10, if she needs a rental car, she will look for one online. And the future conditional clause is if she needs a rental car. So just remember that the if clause is the future conditional clause that you circle, and the verb that you use in the if clause should be in the present tense, and the verb in the main clause is in the future tense. Now, let's turn to page 125. And let's see if we can answer the questions in part B. It says, talk with a partner, ask and answer questions about the pictures. It says, what will John do if the weather is good? He'll play soccer. So you can see that if the weather is good in the picture, he's kicking a soccer ball, so he'll play soccer. You could say if the weather is bad, he'll watch TV, because that's what's happening in the picture on the right. But the question says, what will John do if the weather is good? So it would be he'll play soccer. What will he do if the weather isn't good, or if the weather is bad? He'll watch a movie. So you can see that he's watching a movie. Now, let's look at the pictures in the second section. It says go hiking and go shopping. And we have the two people named Melinda and Pedro. So the question would be, what will Melinda and Pedro do if the weather is good? Because you can see it's nice and sunny here in the picture on the left. And below the picture it says go hiking. So the answer would be they'll go hiking. Now in the picture on the right you can see that it's raining. So the question would be, what will Melinda and Pedro do if the weather isn't good? And you can see that at the bottom it says go shopping. So you would say they'll go shopping. Now I'm going to answer the questions for part 3. What will Ken do if the weather is good? So that's in picture number 1. So you would say he'll go swimming. What will Ken do if the weather isn't good? He'll clean the house. Now picture number 4. What will Andrea do if the weather is good? She will work in the garden. What will Andrea do if the weather isn't good? She'll read a book. And finally, picture number 5. What will Kim and Ton do if the weather is good? They'll walk downtown. What will Kim and Ton do if the weather isn't good? They'll take a bus. And finally, in part 3, it says communicate, work with a partner, ask and answer questions. Take notes in the chart. So you can ask a family member or a friend the following questions and fill in the chart. It says, what will you do if you have time off in the summer? I'll visit my family in Mexico. So the next one would be, what will you do if you have a 3-day weekend? And then you could tell what your friend might do and fill in the blank using the future tense. Then it says, what will you do if you get some extra money? And finally, what will you do if the weather is beautiful next weekend? All right, that concludes this part of the lesson. Thanks for watching. I'll be right back. So now we're going to turn to page 126 in the same book, and we're going to do a lesson on future time clauses. And it says here, the clauses with after and before. So we're going to make future time clauses using after and before, and we're going to talk about the order of events, or what will happen first and what will happen next. And we're going to use these words after and before to establish the correct order. So it says here, use after and before to introduce adverb clauses to talk about the order of future plans. Use after plus present tense verbs to introduce the first event. Use the future tense in the main clause. So remember, you use after with the present tense, and then that's going to be introducing the first event, and then you're going to use future in the main clause. So the second part says use before plus present tense verbs to introduce the second event. So after introduces the first event, but before introduces the second event. And it says use the future tense in the main clause. So in both cases, we use the future tense in the main clause. But the verb tense in the after or the before clause has to be in the present tense. Let's look at the examples. It says, after Kim finishes school, he will take a vacation. So, the first thing that happens is Ken finishes school, and then the second thing is that he will take a vacation. So, the first event is he finishes school. The second is takes a vacation. So, we use after to introduce the first event. And then we use the present tense in that verb clause. In that clause, that's an adverb clause. And then we use the future tense in the main clause. He will take a vacation. Next, it says Kim will take a vacation after he finishes school. So we've just flipped the order. We put the main clause first, and then we put the after clause at the end of the sentence. And notice that there's a comma that follows the after clause if it's at the beginning of the sentence, but there's no comma in the second clause or the second sentence when the after clause comes at the end of the sentence. Now let's look at the next two examples. It says, before Kim takes a vacation, he will finish school. So we still have the same two events, finishing vacation or takes a vacation and finishing school. But in this case, we want to talk about the vacation first, and it says before he takes a vacation, he will finish school. So that means that finishing school is still the first event, but you introduce the second event when it says before Kim takes a vacation. So you use before to introduce the second event. And then finally it says Kim will finish school before he takes a vacation. So again, before he takes a vacation is the second event, and that comes at the end of the sentence. And you put the main clause in the future tense. Kim will finish school is the main clause. And over here in the blue box, it says useful language. Use a comma when if, before, and after clauses are at the beginning of the sentence. So just as I said, when the before, the after, or the if clause come at the beginning of the sentence, you put a comma after the clause. But there is no clause, there's no comma if the if or the before or the after clause comes at the end of the sentence. Now let's look at part 2A. It says complete the sentences. Use the correct form of the verb. Write 1 above the first event. Write 2 above the second event. It says Kara will talk to a travel agent before she books a flight. So the first event is talking to the travel agent, and the second event is booking a flight. Next it says, before Cynthia leaves for Puerto Rico, she will buy some new clothes. So the first event is buy the clothes, and the second event is leaving for Puerto Rico. Number 3, Donald will take a taxi to the hotel after he picks up his garbage. So the first event is picks up the garbage, and the second event is take a taxi to the hotel. Number 4, the campers will make a fire before they cook their dinner. So the first event is make a fire, and the second event is cook their dinner. After they finish eating, they will clean up the campsite. So the first event is finish eating, and the second event is clean up the campsite. I will call you after I return from my trip. So the first event is return from the trip, and the second event is I will call you. Number 7, after I get my passport, I will make the reservations. After I get my passport, I will make the reservations. So the first event is get the passport. The second event is make the reservations. Number 8, before we go to Mexico, we will learn some words in Spanish. So the first event is learn some words in Spanish, and the second event is go to Mexico. Jack will lock the doors before he leaves for the airport. So the first event is lock the doors, and the second event is leave for the airport. Maria will print her boarding pass before she goes to the airport. So the first event is print the boarding pass, and the second event is going to the airport. Now, if you turn to page 127, we can look at part B. It says, talk with a partner. Anita is going to the airport. Talk about her plans. Use before or after. So if you look at the first two pictures, the first picture, that's the first event. Anita checks in. The second event is Anita checks her bag. So it says after Anita checks in, she'll check her bag. After Anita checks in, she'll check her bag. So remember, after introduces the first event, and the second event is she checks her bag. So that comes second. So that's in the future tense. And then part B says, before Anita goes through security, she'll check her bag. So here we have Anita going through security, which is the second event. And before that, which is the first event, she checks her bag. So before Anita goes through security, she'll check her bag. Now, if you go to part 4, it says buy a cup of coffee, and part 5 says check her messages. So if you wanted to use after, you could say, after Anita buys a cup of coffee, she will check her messages. After Anita buys a cup of coffee, she will check her messages. And number 6 is read a magazine. And 7 is get on the plane. So you could also make a statement saying, before Anita gets on the plane, she will read a magazine. If you want to use before, you would say, before she gets on the plane, she will read a magazine. And then number 8 says, turn off her cell phone. So you could say, after Anita gets on the plane, she will turn off her cell phone. After she gets on the plane, she will turn off her cell phone. Okay, that finishes up lesson number 10C. So we're finished with 10C. I want to thank you for watching the video, and I hope you have a great day.